Welcome back to another special report from Catholic Family News. I'm Brian McCall, the editor-in-chief, and we are going to welcome back to today's program Father John Lovell, who should be familiar to our viewers. He's appeared at least 2 times I can remember, maybe more, sharing with us information on canceled priests, which is a shorthand way of referring to priests who are suffering persecution, often for a variety of different reasons, but essentially coming down from being good priests but somehow not being in favor with the powers that be in dioceses or religious orders, and they've essentially been removed from practicing their ministry and doing what they were ordained to do unjustly, and as persecution in the church against many attached to the traditional mass, attached to actual Catholic doctrine, has increased. And a lot of times people don't realize what that means to be a priest sort of put on the sidelines, not only spiritually, psychologically, but just financially and practically. And Father Lovell has been a really strong advocate and voice for help and aid to priests in this circumstance. He himself has lived through many years of suffering this kind of unique persecution to this particular crisis in the church. So, Father, welcome back to joining us on Catholic Family News.
Thank you so much, Brian. It is wonderful to be back.
So probably the last time we talked to you, you were still involved with an organization that you spent a lot of time getting up and running. You actually invited me to one of their conferences, which was fantastic, in Chicago several years ago. But things took a sort of a turn, and it often happens in a lot of nonprofits or areas where there's a really good mission, a really good goal, but sometimes in the execution of that, things don't go so well. So could you maybe summarize for our viewers kind of what happened with the other organization to help canceled priests and why you've sort of started off a different direction?
Well, absolutely. And Brian, again, thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of Catholic Family News. I'm actually a big fan of yours personally. I love your books. I love your articles. I one time, to another canceled priest, compared you to Michael Davies.
Okay.
And that priest said, no. Brian is above Michael Davies. So I don't mean to make you blush, but I wanted to tell you that. So he thought you were a step above. So, and don't get me wrong, I love Michael Davies, and so does the other priest. Michael Davies has contributed very much to the traditional movement. I mean, he is the godfather of the movement in the English-speaking world. That said, though, I founded and co-founded the Coalition for Canceled Priests in 2021, June of 2021, on the Feast of St. John the Baptist, and who was our patron. And as many 501c3s, we started up very quickly. We had a lot of people come and go, both in the way of volunteers and on the board. And I was always just told by many professionals, and I'm talking about lawyers and CPAs that deal with nonprofits. They say, Father, you're a startup like any company. There's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. It's going to be a rocky road the first few years, specifically like the first 5. A lot of people are going to come in, a lot of people are going to have ideas. This is what we want to do. This is what we're going to do. And I always made clear that my degrees are not in business, okay? I never shied away from that fact. And mine was more in the ecclesiastical world, because especially laymen who are not necessarily born and raised in tradition, they sometimes don't understand the ecclesiastical politics. And some think it's like a bureaucracy in a business. Some think it's like the military. And in some ways it is like both of those. But the church politics and the way things work in the church, you really have to be, and I don't mean to sound clerical in this, you really almost have to be a priest and had to have gone through seminary and lived in the ecclesiastical world for several years to understand it. I joined the seminary in the 1990s. So it's something that I'm quite familiar with. And, it's interesting because people will come with enthusiasm and they'll say, oh, we should try this or we should try that. And then when you have that ecclesiastical background, you're able to say, that's not going to work. Or this, yeah, maybe, but probably not. And anyway, so we had those ups and downs. We had people come. We hired an executive director who had all the credentials that you would want for running a 501c3 MBA, all of that. Has worked in 501c3s before. We paid him a very good salary. And we just discovered that he wasn't getting the job done. And the board members that I was not picking, the co-founder was, just didn't quite understand what our goal is. And our goal was, yes, to give emergency help to priests, but it was also, now we have to look into the long term. How are we going to get these priests back into ministry, whether it's in their diocese or religious order or not? We were founded just weeks before Traditionis Custodes came out. We were founded during the COVID crisis. So we started to see all these different things happening where people needed priests, where we saw that priests needed to have ongoing formation, which is so critical. I always want to tell people is that priests are like doctors. Doctors have to go back, and maybe lawyers too, have to go back and take certain classes every once in a while in order to keep up with their license. Priests should do that too. We need to stay up with philosophy, with theology, not about the new brand or the new type of theology or the new philosophy. I'm not saying that at all, but we need to stay rooted specifically in Aquinas, specifically in the Church Fathers, both philosophy and theology, in order to keep fresh our ministry. And that's so important. And so we were moving in that direction. And in the spring of 2023, I decided as the president to say, all right, guys, we just got a house, a safe house for priests. I want to bring in a couple of people that I thought would help the organization. One of them was Father Altman. And I was bringing Father Altman in, not just because he was another priest, but because he has his MBA, he's an attorney. And I thought, all right, maybe if we bring him into the organization, he spoke at all of our conferences, but was still kind of on the outside. And Father Altman has raised so much money, he doesn't need the help of canceled priests. But I thought if we brought him in, his expertise might be able to help get everything under control. Well, you were at the Rosemont Conference in 2023. In my opinion, one of the best Catholic conferences ever done. And I've been to many, okay?
Yes.
From everything from the Napa Institute, the Catholic Identity Conference, everything in between. It was a highlight. And what I started to notice, though, with the board, with Father Altman and with the other board members, is that they just kept pushing me out. They asked me not to be president anymore. I agreed. Then they asked me not to be on the board anymore, again, because it looked like, because I was getting a salary, I was only getting a priest salary from the coalition. But it looked, they thought it looked bad to be on the board and collecting a salary. In reality, what I've come to learn now, I don't want to say I'm an expert on 501c3s, but I'm getting there, is that a lot of people actually take salaries that are on the boards of 501c3s,
and not priest level salaries.
Yeah, and not and I'm going to get to that in a moment. So, but I agreed to that. I was fine with stepping even off the board, for the betterment of the organization. And then what started to happen, is specifically after the conference, is I started to get treated more like an employee than I was the founder of the organization. And I don't mean to sound arrogant when I say that, but it was just like all of a sudden I was told what to do. I wasn't asked what I thought anymore. It was kind of like, and I finally said to them, I said, to the board, and they were all gentlemen. And well, I thought they were gentlemen. I mean, they're clear. But I said to all of them, I said, I founded this organization. I am still the face of this organization. And I want to be careful that we don't go down a road that is eventually going to destroy us in the ecclesiastical world, or in any way make me look bad, okay? Because I don't agree with it. And so what happened was in August of 2023, less than 2 months after the Rosemont Conference, I get a call well, we need to have this emergency board meeting and you have to be present. It's a Friday night at 8 o'clock. So we get on there and Altman is just going off about this, that, or the other. One thing that he was complaining about was a dinner of all the priests. And he was complaining about that. And I finally said, Father, I'm sorry. And Father Altman does not like being interrupted. I said, Father, I'm sorry. That dinner was not paid for by the coalition. In fact, you paid for it. You picked the restaurant and you told the priests get whatever they wanted. Okay, now it was a fancy steakhouse. And I'm sitting there as a server because I've supported myself as a canceled priest as a server. I'm sitting there going, this is don't ever tell priests get whatever you want. Okay.
That's a mistake.
It is not going to go well for the person paying. But at the same time, all of these priests knew Father Altman had the money to pay for it. Okay. That said, is that he's going on as if somehow this was a bad thing for the coalition. And I said to him, no, Father, that's not true. And so they suspended me without pay off the bat. They got an attorney to start investigating me because they also said, well, we've been getting complaints from workers, specifically 1099 workers. And just for everyone to make clear, a 1099 worker is somebody who's not actually employed by the corporation. They are paid by the corporation to do a specific task. For example, you get a CPA to do your taxes. That's a 1099 for an organization. And one thing that I was always very clear with is that, look, we have to stay in the black. And we did, okay? We bought the house with no mortgage. We never had any debts when I was with the organization. And the little I knew about business, I made sure that we never, ever extended ourselves where we didn't have at least 6 months of reserve, okay? And our type of organization, we were not built by big donors. It was very much grains of sand type of donations, the $5, $25, $100, that just kept coming in and still does for that organization, for the coalition. And so I'm sitting there now in limbo, not getting paid. And I had to go out, start working as a restaurant server again. They did allow me to stay at the coalition house. But then in December, abruptly, after they lawyered up, I lawyered up because I want to tell everybody on this interview, Professor McCall will be the first one to tell you, don't you ever go into a meeting where the other side has an attorney and you don't,
No.
And
it's a shame. I met a lot of people think, well, I'm just going to tell the truth. I'm just going to do the right thing. Well, you can't assume the lawyer they're bringing is going to do that way. So
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So, all of a sudden then in December, they come out with a statement that they got rid of me. Well, at this point, all the canceled priests, I shouldn't say all, but the majority of canceled priests that we were helping realized what was going on and that it was basically a coup d'etat. And they were just basically getting rid of me because they didn't want me anymore. And they all sided with me. And so that's when in December of 2023, the letters over social media started flying, and then that's when Father Altman came out with that horrible letter, that screed. And to be honest with you, I had several people say to me, Father, this is defamation. You should sue. And I wanted to. The problem is I didn't have the money to sue. Unfortunately, our justice system sometimes, especially when it comes to civil court, you want to sue, okay, you better have $50,000 to $250,000 in reserve, And I remember asking my attorney, how much would it cost for a defamation lawsuit? He said at least $50,000.
Yeah.
He
No,
says,
I tell my students almost every week, the only people who win in a lawsuit are the lawyers.
And my lawyer said that.
Yes.
And I had a great donor who was paying all my lawyer fees.
Wow.
But even though this donor was well off, he wasn't extremely wealthy. And
Sure.
I couldn't do that to him. He was a man in his 70s, still is a man in his 70s. He's still with us. And I just said, oh, no, I couldn't do this. So I bowed out of the house. I moved out because, they tried to evict me. And even though I was out of the house, they still proceeded with an eviction notice in the state of Indiana because that's where the house was. And I was just fine staying with friends and family and getting working in the restaurant industry again.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, Dan 70 of Sanctus Ranch, specifically of the Restoring Christian Culture Initiative, reached out to me. And Dan came to the Rosemont Conference just like you did.
Mm-hmm.
We were always in touch. He's one of those people that, like, every 2 months, we would have a phone call because he was housing canceled priests down here. And he said, Father, we need to get an organization up and running. You have all of these priests that supported you who are now not getting any funding from the coalition. You're not getting any funding from the coalition. You, as a who has his hands consecrated, should not be working in the restaurant. And let me tell you something. Even in the trad world, in the traditional world, there are two camps. There are those that say the priest should never ever do secular work, should be focused on his ministry of prayer and teaching. And then you have others who say, no, you know what, you're canceled, go out and get a job. Okay, get a job and support yourself. And those were even in the fighting that was going on in December of 2023. You had on social media everybody kind of saying those two things. And I didn't personally have a problem working in a restaurant. I'm still young enough. I'm 45 years old to do it. I mean, if I was 75, I would not be doing it. But, I was able to do that. But I also, and I don't mean to sound selfish here, I was tired of people telling me, like Father Altman, I was living largesse when I was only getting a priest salary. And you know what? It's nice when I'm able to earn my own money and not have to be told by somebody, oh, well, you're just a priest, you should do this. Because unfortunately, a lot of people think all priests are Franciscans.
Right.
And all priests take a vow of poverty. We don't. Diocesan priests do not get paid well, but we still get a paycheck and we still pay taxes. And we're still expected to pay for our own cars and all of this. And as a canceled priest, I have to pay for my own housing. So these are all these things that happen. So I just want to say, and I'm going to continue with the narrative here in just a moment, but I just wanted to recap. I gave you just a brief overview of what happened with the coalition.
Sure.
And for about a year, I was just simply back working in the restaurants. And then all of a sudden, Dan 70 really pulled me to do this. I wasn't necessarily interested in getting back into it. And I encourage everyone to go to unprofitableservants.org. I think you have it up on the screen already. I see it there. And just take a look at what we're doing. What we're doing is we're going to avoid the pitfalls that happened with the coalition. We're making sure that 90%, at least 90% of everything that goes, that is donated goes to the priests. We're making sure that we're coming out quarterly, if not monthly, at least quarterly, with financial reports for everyone to see. We're still going to respect the anonymity of the priests coming there. But we're also, and by the way, I forgot to mention this, half the staff of the coalition left in protest, quit.
Wow.
When and we did not have a large staff. We had about 4 of us, but I was gone, and basically Father Duvall, who was the priestly assistance coordinator, and then also our investigator, left in protest to what the coalition did to me and was doing to the priests. So, I want to let everybody know that we're continuing the solid work that we were doing with the coalition of doing background checks to making sure the priest is actually a validly ordained priest and actually needs help. We're making sure and has not committed a serious crime. So we're still continuing that with unprofitable servants, and we're still moving forward to make sure that priests have this. And what we're also doing specifically now, and we've made this quite clear, is we want to bring priests to tradition. We want to make sure that we're able to that they know that they have the Society of Pius X available to help them. You have it up on the screen. We want to make sure that we're there to help them if they don't know the traditional Mass, to learn it. We want to make sure that they understand that if they want ongoing formation, that will help them get it, to take classes. One thing that COVID did teach us, Brian, is that you could teach so many things now online,
Yes,
and don't get me wrong, the internet is a cesspool a lot of times, but it's still a tool that can be used for good if you use it correctly. And I mean, Catholic Family News is an excellent example of that. So we want to make sure that priests know that there are still people out there that are helping. And in the process of getting this all set up, Dan Seveny, who runs Unprofitable Servants and Sanctus Ranch, he discovered the Coalition's 990 from last year and simply wrote an article stating the facts, and it was published by Crisis Magazine. And God bless Eric Sammons for publishing it. And I encourage people to go there and just take a look at it. So we also have my podcast, Hope in the Desert, back up and running. It's also going to be, if I could do a plug for Pelican Plus,
Yes.
that is you and many others are participating in or are about to participate in. So it's something that is doing good. Dan is one of these people that doesn't just talk about doing something. He actually goes out and does it, and he's a multi-talented man who, at the same time is very comfortable doing IT work. And at the same time, he's comfortable building a chapel, building a dormitory for a retreat center. And, he saw a need. He could have simply just sat back up in New Hampshire with what by today's standards is a large family. He has a wonderful wife and 6 children, and could have just been one of those traditional Catholics that gives, but still lives a comfortable life. He decided no, he was going to roll up his sleeves. He was going to move his family cross country to Texas. He was going to start a retreat center, and it's just blossomed from there. A retreat center. Now he has a school in the Catholic tradition. He's being attacked by the Archdiocese of San Antonio for this now. He's embraced tradition along with his whole family. They have a beautiful chapel down here that not only retreatants can participate in, but also the canceled priests. I think what a lot of people don't realize is many canceled priests, they have to celebrate Mass on a table. They have to celebrate Mass on a bureau in their bedroom. To have an actual altar to celebrate Mass is a rarity for canceled priests. And so now they have this available to them as a permanent location to live if they wanted to, or as a place to just simply come and do a retreat. And Sanctus Ranch is open to all Catholics. That's the beautiful thing about it. So I'm sorry I've been hogging the microphone, but I'll be certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have for your audience.
No, it's a long story, and it's an important story. And I know this isn't about Pelican or Pelican Plus specifically, but since you've mentioned it, fortuitously, we are recording this interview on this day that this service has been launched. And it is kind of an all-encompassing Catholic media enterprise, really, the best way to describe it. And its goal is really to bring together all different sources of trusted Catholic media that people and families can know are safe. And the reason I think it actually connects to your story, not just because Dan has obviously been helpful in your story, is that there is definitely a problem that exists in some traditional organizations that is every situation has its own unique parts to it, but there's definitely a theme, because as I was listening to you tell the story, I couldn't help but think of good man John Henry Weston, who went through almost identically some of the things you said this summer, as many of our viewers know. His ended a little differently than yours, but essentially it was the same thing, a kind of board poisoned against the founder of the organization, these accusations claiming to come from employees, legalistic, kind of unfair tactics, to really just sort of ruin and bring down a person who had given their whole life or many years of their life to an important cause. And again, I just kept thinking of him as I listened to your story and the similarities. So my question is, why do you think that is? What is there maybe about people involved in the traditionalist movement that some of these organizations end sort of turning on themselves? Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's an excellent question. And before I answer it, I just want to comment and say it was sad to say almost hilarious, because Father Altman gave an interview, I think it was with Vicky Yamasaki of Corpus Christi for Unity and Peace, where he basically just went after the Life Site board. I mean, he defended John Henry to the kill, and did not do that for me. He actually never sat down, even though I brought him onto the board and we always had a good relationship. That doesn't mean I always agreed with everything that Father Altman says. And what a lot of traditional Catholics have to realize is Father Altman really isn't a traditional Catholic. Yes, he knows the traditional Mass, but he much prefers the Novus Ordo. I mean, he's made that clear. So, it was kind of funny watching this interview where he's just going after them. And it was just like, Father, you did the exact same thing to me. You did the exact same thing to me. And I was just disappointed when situations like what happened to me and the coalition happened. You were able to see who your friends were. Okay. And I was shocked after Father Altman's screed of 2023, December of 2023, which is still up on the internet, where he doesn't even call me father. He says John Lovell the whole time. I'm amazed how many people in the Catholic media world still stuck with him, and that was quite sad. And what I think, this as well as I do, if not better, because you and I have both been in the traditional world for many, many years, in fact, decades. I discovered the traditional Mass in 1996. So I'm going on 30 years here.
We're about the same year. That's amazing.
Yeah. But what I've noticed in the traditional world is that you have a lot of people who, and not just in the traditional world, by the way, but in the traditional world, you have a lot of people, it has to be done a certain way. And I'm not just talking about the Mass or the liturgy. I'm just talking about if it's not done a certain way, they don't want to have anything to do with it,
Right.
And what I noticed with the coalition and the board is that I really didn't have traditionalists on the board. All right. I had people that were worried about what the bishop would say. We had people like Father Altman who would say, tie a millstone around their neck and throw them in the sea. You had several of those people. You had people that were constantly worried about the boogeyman right around the corner. Well, we better be careful because we might get sued. We better, and it's just like, no, I made sure we had D&O insurance. And for those that don't know, director and operators insurance to protect from liability, the board. I made sure that happened because obviously, even though the main mission of the coalition and unprofitable servants is not to attack bishops, obviously, when you're defending canceled priests, it's not going to look good to the bishops. I mean, Dan is dealing with that in the Archdiocese of San Antonio. But it's things like that. And I would simply say this is that traditionalists have to realize that they're getting an influx of people because of Traditionis Custodes, because of Pope Francis, now maybe even possibly Pope Leo. It looks like that's happening now too, is that people are coming in and their path to tradition is different. And they might not be as far along as you are, and that's okay. Our job as traditionalists, whether priest or laity, is to guide people to realize we don't have all the answers, to realize that we're still on that path too, and that we're there to help others get ahead in order to discover the beauty of tradition, which is just simply Catholicism when it comes down to it. It's the first time I met Father Fullerton, very nice man who's the district superior for the Society of Pius X. I told him, I said, I never really thought of the society as traditional Catholic. I just saw them as being Catholic because really it's redundant to say traditional Catholic. If you're Catholic, you should embrace tradition. You have to. We're a traditional religion. So I encourage traditionalists, especially those that are watching this, is to be open, to that. And to be fair, I don't mean this in any way to sound as a critique, but I met a lovely young woman just a few weeks ago, and it was at a family's home. She came over. She was a doctoral student of mathematics in that town of the family I was visiting. She came over, and she's originally from St. Mary's, Kansas. Had a great conversation with her. She was born and raised in tradition. Well, the topic of Cardinal, or the former Cardinal and now deceased McCarrick, came up. He had absolutely no idea who that is or who that was. I mean, And in one sense, you kind of go, well, I'm so happy that you didn't have to suffer through all of that, the summer of shame and everything
Yeah.
that many of us had to go through and having to deal with that. But it's a reminder to me, as someone who strives to be a traditionalist, is if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. That
Yeah.
yes, it is good not to be in the daily grind of gossip on social media of who said this and who said that. That is a very good thing to avoid. But at the same time, we have to have at least be partially in that stream in order not to allow monsters like McCarrick to rise up again. Am I
Yeah.
making sense? I hope
No,
I
it makes
am.
a lot of
So,
sense. And
yeah.
I really agree with what you said about humility and realizing whenever you're in a crisis, which again, if somebody's not going to admit there's a crisis in the church, there's not a lot to talk to them about. But if
Yeah.
somebody admits there's some form of a crisis, nobody has all the perfect answers. Now, when it comes to the dogmas of the faith and what we have the answers like that's what are we supposed to believe? What are that? But how we get through this crisis, how we make sense of it, how we explain it, none of us have the answers because we're living through it. And I think is a tendency of people to sort of, well, my particular way I figured this out is the only one, and I don't want anything to do with anybody else who's not with me, which I've gotten in trouble for having interviews with people who are state of a contest. I got a position I completely disagree with. I don't believe it's the right position in how to explain the crisis. But like, it doesn't mean the person is just like irrelevant. They believe the proofs of the Catholic faith. They're kind of not sure how to make sense of this. And we don't really advance anything by just saying like, I'm cutting you out, or I can't talk to you, or, I can't talk to somebody who talked to you, which is, somebody once said to me, well, I can't talk to you now because you interviewed this person. And I think that is part of the problem, that we have to distinguish between the truths of the faith, those stars, those fixed stars, and the practicality of prudence of getting through this crisis and how we do that.
I mean, if I could add in on that, one of the best books I read on the liturgy was Work of Human Hands by
Yes.
Father Cicada. And even though he is from Milwaukee and I'm from Chicago, I never had the fortune to meet him.
Yeah.
Now, just because I admire his work in a lot of things, that doesn't mean I completely agree with him. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I should shun him,
Yeah.
And by the way, that's vice versa. Sedevacantis a lot of times is, oh, sorry, you're una cum or whatever.
Yeah.
You're in mortal sin. It's like, no, we should have conversations. And I'm glad to see that that's starting to happen, at least with some. But I'm going to tell you, Brian, right now, some of the holiest priests I ever met, all right, were ordained in the Novus Ordo, are still priests of the Society of Pius X. Yeah. Some are in the Resistance, or whatever it's called now. I've met a lot of good people in a lot of the different camps, and you or I should not be shunned just simply because we had a conversation with them.
Exactly.
We can agree to disagree on a lot of things, but realize that in the end, we're agreeing on a lot more than we're disagreeing on. I don't mean to sound folksy by saying that, but it's true.
It is very true. It is. Well, if we can shift back a minute again, really good work getting you and Dan and others working, getting Unprofitable Servants up. You're back doing what you wanted to do, which just help priests. What are your thoughts, having been doing this for a long time now in different contexts? What is it like for canceled priests in these, say, early half year of the Leonine papacy now in 2025? Is it the same problems, the same things, or are you seeing any new emerging trends or differences being faced by priests who are being canceled now?
It is interesting to watch. There was a lot of hope at the beginning of Pope Leo's papacy that things were going to be different. And in one sense, they are. Okay. He is not, for lack of a better term, the tyrant that Pope Francis is. I think everybody could agree with that. He's a lot more laid back. At the same time, he's doing and saying things that are making even just conservative Catholics cringe a little bit. All right. And for some, they're cringing a lot. Okay. I get that. There's a lot more evidence that, yes, he might be Pope Francis 2.0, at least in what he is teaching and what he's saying. He's clearly not Francis 2.0 in personality.
Right.
That's clear. He's a lot. He's coming across as a lot kinder. And again, you and I are probably both going to be getting flack from somebody for saying that on both sides. But I think for priests, what we're still seeing is that we're seeing the cancellation of masses, traditional masses specifically happening. We're still seeing bishops, whether it's Charlotte, Detroit, Chicago, and many other places, where they don't even want you to kneel to receive communion, you know.
Wow.
And so what we're doing here at Unprofitable Servants is making sure that priests know that we have their back, that if somebody is going after them for doing traditional things, not just in the liturgy, but even in teaching and catechesis, we have them. I mean, I can guarantee you that there are priests that if it was discovered they were using the Baltimore Catechism, they would be removed from the parish that they're at. So they're doing a lot of things clandestinely, and that sometimes is a good way to do it. And to be honest with you, Brian, the canceled priests as a whole, as a group, we're a mixed bag. We have some who are like, we don't care what the bishop thinks. We want to go out there and celebrate mass for these communities that the society can't get to.
Right.
We have others that say, you know what, I still want to try to work with the bishop. I don't want to necessarily go out and do that. That's all right too. We're here to help the priest discover what he thinks is best. And I encourage, if I can make a plug for Dr. Peter Kwasniewski, I recommend two books, Bound by Truth and True Obedience. I think especially in the traditional world, the laity and priest both need to read those books. True Obedience, basically sets up what we're really obedient to and have to be. We're not all Jesuits, and the bishops are not all the Jesuit superior, and we're all the Jesuit novices. That's not how obedience works, especially in the diocesan and the secular world of priests. And we've talked about this before on the show. We have to realize there's a difference between a religious priest that takes vows, and there's a difference with secular priests, diocesan priests, and priests of apostolic life, like the society, like the fraternity, who take promises of obedience. There is a difference there. Now, granted, if you're the superior or the bishop, you would like, many times, you would just like the priest to shut up and do what he's told. But that's not how obedience works. And to be honest with you, what people have to realize is obedience is the two parties listening to each other. And I would like to see, and you know what, I'm not saying that it was perfect before Vatican II when it comes to obedience. I'm not saying that at all.
No.
What I would like to see in the 21st century happen is bishops realizing they're spiritual fathers and that their priests are their spiritual sons, but not their 3-year-old son, their adult sons. I mean, you have children now who are adults.
Yes.
You know that the way you treat them and the way you act with them is completely different with how you treated them when they were 2 or 3 years old. And so I would like us to try to achieve that. And again, I want to make clear, I don't think it was like that before the council. All right. What I'm saying is that we need to start moving in that way, especially when it comes to that. And if I could say one more thing, especially as happy I've been with the society, with the priests that I've met in the Society of Pius X, I think a lot of people have to realize that attend the society chapels. I know the priests already know this, but the laity don't, is that not everyone's called to the society and that way of life, okay?
Yes.
The society, they like to say it's an irregular canonical situation. I don't know what that means, but I can tell you this, is that the society is one of those things where, yes, they're technically secular priests, like I am, a diocesan priest, where they don't take vows, but they live a religious life. Somebody described it as basically that Archbishop Lefebvre set up the society as he ran the Holy Ghost Fathers. And that makes a lot of sense. They do a lot of traveling. They're on the road a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
They don't get paid very much, which again is a good thing. I'm not saying that priests should be millionaires. Priests definitely should not be millionaires. But at the same time, is the society priests don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. how they're gonna put gas in their car. That is taken care of by the society. And I would just like to start seeing more traditional priest groups pop up, possibly in the oratory system. We're coming up on the feast of John Henry Newman on Thursday. I would like to see the secular priesthood, whether parish or apostolic life, kind of move in that direction. Because one thing I said to a fraternity priest, I said, why aren't you living together in priories like the society is? You seem to be living a lot of times living alone,
Yes.
like diocesan priests, which is a danger. And they agree. They would like to be more grouped together. And for those priests listening that say, well, I just don't get along well with people, you got to figure it out. Because priests living by themselves is a danger, and priesthood has to avoid thinking that they're bachelors. We're
Yes.
not. And by the way, uh, single life is not a permanent vocation in the church. People have to realize too. We're all called to either marriage, the priesthood, or to the consecrated life, and that's what it comes down to. And we have to start seeing that, not just as traditional Catholics, but all Catholics.
No, I agree. I started a huge, interesting conversation when I made that point about the single life not being a vocation. There's some people are sensitive about that, but no, I think you make a great point. And the Archbishop Lefebvre never intended or wanted the Society of St. Pius X to be the church. He always said, we are at the service of the church. That's why when other groups would come to him, Dominicans, or he wouldn't say, okay, join us, become a society priest. Or the Benedictines. I still remember that story when Father Cyprian came to him when he had to leave his monastery, when they made compromises. And he said, well, I guess I should become a society priest. And he looked at me and said, no, be a Benedictine monk. That's what you're supposed to be. And so, I think it is important. There's a lot of people I've heard, oh, this priest was canceled or left and he went to talk to society and he didn't join. There must be something wrong with him. And that's not true at all. The superiors will tell you from the society exactly what you said, that person can be a good priest, a traditional priest, but they were not called to the very particular life of the Society of St. Pius X. And the problem in our crisis in the church is there are some, but not the richness of choices to live a traditional priesthood in the different ways that it could have before the council is not always there. And I think people have to be very careful with priests like that. Oh, well, they didn't join the society. There must be something wrong with them. It may not be at all. They just, like you said, the mission life, the different aspects of their life are just not what God's calling them to.
And if I could just add, and again, I do not mean this in any way as a critique. I'm a great admirer of Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X. But I think even in the society, we have to realize we're in a post-traditionis custodes world.
Yes.
And there are priests out there that are in desperate need. And I'm trying, and the priests that are part of Unprofitable Servants, we're trying our best. But at the same time, there are priests out there that need very good priestly formation. And I've heard the society say, "Oh yeah, well they could just come to Denver for 2 years." Yeah. Well, I know a lot of priests who just can't afford that. They can't for this reason or for that reason. They just can't give up what they're doing and go there for 2 years. Or join the society. And I hope that the traditional world, not just the society, the traditional world as a whole, that we start moving towards, listen, we have technology at our fingertips. Let us use it for good. Let's start doing priestly classes. Let's start, helping priests discover tradition. A lot of that can be done, just as this interview is being done, via the internet. And if we're starting to do that more, I think we're going to start seeing more fruits. Because one thing I've discovered, we talked about this before, about the path, okay, is that you have so many people coming into tradition that are uncatechized, it's becoming overwhelming. And I even hear that from society priests. It's becoming overwhelming to get down to the nitty gritty. And so we need more priests. And I think the society, Father Fullerton and all of them would be the first to agree. We need more out there. We definitely do. So again, and not as a critique, just as we need to have an assessment in the last 4 or 5 years post traditionis custodes of how we could do it better.
Absolutely agreed. And as this next pontificate unfolds and we see where it leads, again, I think those who proclaimed the end of the crisis, everything's going to be great in May of this year, as we said at the time, were certainly getting ahead of themselves. There's a long road to get out of this, and ultimately only God will save it. Well, thank you, Father, for joining us, sharing your story for the past couple of years with us. Again, we've been talking about this new organization, Unprofitable Servants, Canceled Priest Fund. You heard Father say earlier, they're committed that if you support this fund, your dollars are going directly to actually help priests, that 90% of the dollars coming in are going directly to the support of canceled priests. Obviously, they need some money to keep the organization itself going. That's always a challenge with a charity, but that's the kind of charity, nonprofit work you want to give to that's not lost its focus on its mission. So if you want to help priests like this, and again, it's easy to sit and criticize priests, right? Oh, why don't they do something? Why don't they just say the traditional mass? Why don't they stand up? But I think a lot of laity, we underestimate the cost that will come from that. And to do it alone is very hard. It's difficult. And really an organization, and not just financially, but all the aspects of support spiritually. Because a lot of times, as I think you've said, priests come to these to tradition different ways. I know Father Michael Rodriguez, who I know, he obviously defends a lot in Mass now, was learned it, has promoted it, but he really started by just standing up at some public meetings and speaking out against immoral sins against the 6th and 9th commandment and being sanctioned by the government. And that is what brought down the canceling on him. And it was only through that he then began to see the connection between the other issues. So, priests often, they certainly need financial help, but they also need, as you said, this moment has been a moment of grace, those other supports to see where God's using this persecution to lead them. So thank you for not giving up. It's easy when you go through a crisis like you did to just say, okay, I'm done with this. I tried. And thank you for persevering. And we're glad to hear things are going forward.
If I can just end on a note, because we were speaking about vocations, we just celebrated the Feast of St. Bruno. And I can tell you, if I personally had a choice of what vocation to live out, it would be Carthusians. Okay. but it's a reminder. It's a reminder to us, and it should be a reminder to us, that God gives us our vocation. Personally, I wouldn't want to be doing this work, but I just keep seeing God putting it in front of me and saying, no, this is work that you have to do. And I think when we start taking the approach that at baptism, God gave us a vocation, and it is up to us to discover that, to nurture it, and to be open up to his will, that's what's eventually going to make us happy. I realize that if I actually go and join a Carthusian monastery, I'll probably go nuts, because that's not my vocation. Even though romantically, I look at it and go, why doesn't everybody want to live this life? And that's something to keep in mind. So I'm kind of delving into the introduction to the devout life when I say stuff like that, but it's something to keep in mind. So, but Brian, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I hope to have you back on Hope in the Desert soon.
I'd be happy to. And thank you for ending on that note. I'm rereading the introduction to the devout life actually right now. So that St. Francis de Sales is on my mind. So excellent. Be happy to join you.
Very good.
I'd be happy to have you back anytime. Thank you, Father.
Thank you. God bless.